A tale of two funerals. First of all, there's the life and the legacy of Queen Elizabeth II, truly the end of an era. 1926 to 2022, the longest reigning monarch in British history and the longest reigning female monarch in all of history. And the only way you can get anyone who's reigned longer is to take King Louis, who I think reigned from age 4, which hardly counts. But when you contrast Queen Elizabeth's funeral with that of the last president or dictator of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, many have been surprised at the outpouring of grief at the passing of the longest reigning monarch in British history, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Evidently, support for tradition and for the monarchy is far stronger than most had been led to believe. Here we've been told we're living in a new world order, globalism, global reset, Mikhail Gorbachev, the man who saved the world, and all sorts of other garbage like that, along with, of course, Disney Plus actually produced a film on Fauci, the man who saved the world. Can you believe it? And, no, nobody can believe it. But suddenly you see, where's all this Christian nationalism coming from? Where's all this tradition? And for the monarchy. And Queen Elizabeth has been an extraordinary person. When she was born, nobody expected her to be queen, because her dad wasn't really next in line for the throne. Her uncle, Edward, was. And so she was brought up in a fairly normal way without being prepared for the throne, because her uncle, her father's brother, Edward, was going to be the next monarch. Although she was used to public life and was obviously royalty, but nevertheless, it wasn't anticipated that her uncle would rather choose an American divorcee than the throne. And when Edward abdicated in 1936, that created a major crisis, because suddenly her father, who wasn't even someone who liked public life, and he had a stuttering problem, the next thing he's thrust into the throne because Edward preferred an American divorcee, which excluded him from the throne. Well, here, I think Elizabeth was only 14 years old when she did her first radio broadcast on BBC. In the Second World War, she actually served as a mechanic and driver in the Army Auxiliary Transport Service, and she is not just good at driving. When she had to host the King of Saudi Arabia, she ensured to drive him, because in Australia, in Saudi Arabia, no woman's allowed to drive at all. So she took great delight in driving this Saudi king all over the place and gave him a really roughy ride. He is crying and screaming and pleading for her to slow down. She is bouncing all over the Balmoral estate there and terrifying this poor soul. But she's one of the few monarchs who knows how to drive and drives well. And she's been known to tell mechanics what's wrong with the car. So she served in the latter part of the Second World War in the Auxiliary Transport Service. In Rhodesia, we used these postage stamps commemorating Princess Elizabeth. And when she came to the throne, the British Empire stretched over a vast amount of the world's land surface. Something like 1/4 of the world's population was under the British crown at that time. And so in Queen Elizabeth's lifetime, the British Empire has shrunk. And it was an extraordinary endeavor, not all good, although they did do some good, like fighting the slave trade, but of course they did monumental evils such as the concentration camps and scorched earth against the Boers in South Africa. Here's the ship that brought the royal family to Cape Town, 1947, April 1947, in Table Bay, and the royal family came to South Africa and Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia, to thank our peoples for what we did during the Second World War. Here at Wingfield, on her 21st birthday, Princess Elizabeth was received, and she also had the opportunity to give a broadcast on her 21st birthday, in which she made the pledge, "God help me to make good my vow, and God bless all of you willing to share in it," as she spoke about devotion to duty, and that her life, whether it be long or short, will be devoted to serving the British Empire and Commonwealth and all its peoples. And On her 21st birthday in Cape Town, dressed up, you should remember this place. This is Cape Town City Hall. And it was done out for a massive birthday party for Princess Elizabeth. And then right here, she is dancing with Sir de Villiers Graaff, I believe, who was leader of the opposition. And you can see the people dressed very differently back then. Grahamstown, some people should remember Grahamstown here, city of saints. There's something like 60 churches there in Grahamstown. And with General Smuts, who at that stage was still Prime Minister of South Africa, not that he'd been elected, but he had actually ousted our elected Prime Minister, who was James Barry Hertzog. Judge General James Barry Hertzog was the most popular Prime Minister in South African history, elected 5 times, every time against Smuts, beating him every time. But because he wouldn't declare war on Germany in September 1939, Smuts ousted him, no election, no referendum, and ruled until the next election, 1948. That's 9 years without being elected. How's that for leading the democracies? But then nobody elected Churchill in 1939 or 1940 either. So interesting how there you had the democracies. Stalin, who elected him? Smuts, Churchill. Anyway, they were the democracies, even if nobody elected them. That's the narrative, and you shouldn't question it all. There's something wrong with you. And here's the king and queen and the princesses, Elizabeth and Margaret, with General Smuts. It looks like this could be by the Drakensberg. And the 2 princesses, Elizabeth and Margaret, I have seen these stamps where South Africa commemorated the visit of the princesses. But we had to do some digging to find the pictures of the royal family visit to Southern Rhodesia. Now, Southern Rhodesia actually contributed more men per census population than any other part of the British Empire Commonwealth in both the First and Second World War. And very dedicated, committed group of people. That is the king and the queen and the princesses Elizabeth and Margaret arriving in Rhodesia and being received with much pomp and ceremony. Rhodesian Railways took them around as well, and the Royal African Rifles also giving them, you can see also over the entrance to Bulawayo, the crown, and the king reviewing some of the Royal African Rifles. And this is also in Bulawayo, where I grew up, and they built all sorts of things to receive them, and you can see enormous patriotic fervor and the balls and dances and everything else being received at opening of Parliament in Salisbury. Now, I remember these events because you can see standing up in the gallery is Princess Elizabeth in the center. Of course, her father, King George VI, and mother, Queen Elizabeth herself as well, and now sitting just underneath the Rhodesian crest here. That would be, again, Princess Elizabeth. Some of the pictures and scrapbooks commemorating the visit to Rhodesia, and there's a lot that most people don't know about. This was a special royal train emblazoned with RR for Rhodesian Railways and the Royal Crest. And this was particularly the Bulawayo scrapbook here. And then being received on the Zambezi River and up at the Matopos World Grave, where they went to visit the tomb of Cecil John Rhodes, and at Victoria Falls, where my father was the catering manager at Victoria Falls Hotel, and he said it was the most terrifying experience of his life catering for the royal family. He said he found it more intimidating than any experience in the 6 years he fought in the Second World War, even more terrifying than being bombed in a blitz or in North Africa at the Battle of El Alamein. You can see how the royalists took it very seriously to cater for the royal family. If you've seen the Downton Abbey films, you might get some idea of how royalists react to when the royalty is there. And so Rhodesia commemorated the 1947 visit in April to Southern Rhodesia with the king and queen and with the princesses on our postage stamps. Interestingly enough, if you look for it, you'll see it. One of the queen's favorite piece of jewelry that she wore frequently was a flame lily, which was made of platinum and diamonds as a gift from the children of Rhodesia to Princess Elizabeth when she visited in April 1947. And you'll see throughout her life, she did bring out this platinum and diamond flame lily brooch frequently. This is Princess Elizabeth's wedding photographs with her husband and Prince Philip, who came from royal Danish family, who were also the royal family of Greece. On her honeymoon, out on the naval yacht, Britannia, playing the piano. I bet you didn't know the Queen could play the piano too. But she was in Africa when her father died in 1952, and she came back. She left as a princess, came back as a queen. This is part of the procession for the burial of her father, King George VI, who died quite young, largely because of his lifelong addiction to smoking. And so at age 25, she became queen, and 16 months later, at age 27, she was crowned. It took about 16 months to organize a coronation, especially when you think that there were people come from all over the empire. And here's some of the pictures of the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. You can imagine being named Elizabeth. The greatest queen, if not the greatest monarch in British history, was Elizabeth I. And so quite another Elizabethan era in a real sense. And this is the 2nd of June 1953 when she was actually crowned. Westminster Abbey. There were apparently 8,000 people crammed in there. I don't know how they did it. They only planned to have 2,000 in for the coronation of King Charles III. And this was the first coronation televised. And it marks quite an extraordinary event. And there's a whole lot about it, but during the service, immediately after taking the oath of office, Elizabeth laid her right hand upon the Bible and said, "The things which I have here before promised I will perform and keep, so help me God." She then went on to kiss the Bible, signed the oath, and returned to her chair. Then, as the photo shows, the Archbishop of the Church of England and the moderator of the Church of the Assembly of Scotland presented a Bible to her, saying, "Our gracious Queen, to keep your Majesty ever mindful of the law and the gospel of God as the rule for the whole of life and the government of Christian principles, we present you with this book. The most valuable thing that the world affords. Here is wisdom. This is the royal law. These are the lively oracles of God." And this is all recorded in the book that changed everything by Vishal Mandavani. Outstanding book. And here you can see the Queen holding the very Bible that she had been presented with as part of the coronation ceremony. The orb that she holds has a cross on top that's symbolizing the whole world, which is under the rule of Christ, and the scepter, which symbolizes the rule over her dominions. And it was impressed, sorry, could I just get some water? It was impressed upon the royal family by Queen Victoria that the royals only keep their throne and crown in stewardship for the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And famously, Queen Victoria once said she looked forward to the return of Christ and hoped it might be in her lifetime, as it would be the greatest joy in her life to hand the crown and the throne over to the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, for whom it is held in trust. The maids of honor of Queen Elizabeth on a coronation day. Later, she had the duty to crown her son, the Prince of Wales, and it is a tradition in Britain that the Prince of Wales is always the heir to the throne. And before you can become the king, you've got to be the Prince or the Princess of Wales, if you are going to be the Queen. And you can see she was received with great joy all over her realms. Well, in Rhodesia, we not only had Cecil Rhodes, as you'd expect, on one side, but we had Queen Elizabeth on the other. Now, this is 1953, fair enough. Now we get in 1964. The Queen is still on the Rhodesian coins. 1964, Zimbabwe bird, and Queen Elizabeth. Notice on the 11th of the 11th, 1965, we've got the picture just around the corner here, when Ian Smith, on behalf of Rhodesia, signed the Declaration of Independence of Rhodesia. It was done in front of a large portrait of Queen Elizabeth II. And in it, and you can read, we've got the Declaration of Independence on the wall just behind the screen here, where he pledged our devotion and loyalty to Queen Elizabeth, and the Rhodesian Declaration of Independence actually ends with the term, God save the Queen. And so it was very, very clear that Rhodesia's independence was done at all times with the declaration, the people of Rhodesia have always shown unswerving loyalty and devotion to Her Majesty the Queen, God save the Queen. So even when Rhodesia declared independence from Great Britain, it pledged allegiance to the Queen, and the Queen remained the head of state of Rhodesia. So even 1968 coins, you can see Queen Elizabeth still on our coins, because she is still the head of a state. And therefore, even here in 1968, and I remember using these notes, you still had the Queen, 1968, she's still on the Rhodesian currency. Even here, 1968, September 1968, Reserve Bank, the Queen is still the head of state of Rhodesia. We were a constitutional monarchy until the British government made it impossible for that to continue. Being received in France, and the Queen and Prince Philip sitting on the thrones in Canada. I think many people forget the fact that Canada is also a constitutional monarchy and under the Crown. And therefore, interesting, when I've gone to Canada, I've asked the Canadians, what makes you different from the Americans? And the normal answer I've had is that we're not Americans. I said, yes, but what? Now, what I was expecting him to say is, we are not a republic, we're a monarchy. But every Canadian I met didn't give that answer. Well, the main thing that differentiates us from the Americans is we're not Americans. But what makes you distinctly Canadian? And the Canadians I met all over could not articulate why they were different. But it is because they're constitutional monarchy. They don't have a president, they have a queen and a prime minister. Here in New Zealand, the Queen meets some of the Maoris, and this would have been the death of Mountbatten. Lord Mountbatten was a favorite uncle of the Queen's, and he was murdered by the IRA with a bomb in his yacht, which was a particularly distressing attack on the monarchy, as he was the favorite uncle for Prince Charles at that stage. Here's the point that I mentioned about Queen Victoria, where Queen Victoria, Dean Farrer, who was the Dean of Westminster Abbey, records how Queen Victoria looked forward to handling the throne and the crown onto the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, in whose trust she was holding it just temporarily as a steward. Now, you might have noticed in our cabinet over here, we've actually got a copy of the Cullinan Diamond. And the Cullinan Diamond was found in South Africa 1906, just north of Pretoria. And this was the largest diamond ever found to that date, I think ever. And here's Joseph Asher making the split, because of course there's no, they couldn't use the diamond that big. Well, they made all sorts of diamonds out of the Cullinan Diamond. I mean, here's Cullinan Diamond 4, and here's Cullinan Diamond 2 and 1 and 3 and all the way up to 9. And they found their way into the crown jewels, which you just noticed on top of the Queen's coffin being driven through to Westminster Hall. And interesting, there's pieces of South Africa all over the crown jewels, whether they're in the Tower of London or on the Queen's head or on top of her coffin right now, including in the orbs and the scepters. All these are South African diamonds. And of course, originally they were made as a gift from the people of the Transvaal to King Edward, who was then reigning, and his queen, Queen Mary, who was a Danish princess before she married him, and she's got it as a brooch and pendant and in the crown, and Queen Elizabeth wore all of these as well, as we can see. So interesting, we've got so much of South Africa around the crown jewels. At one point during the campaigns against South Africa, I remember some characters in the British government saying that South Africa should remove the Union Jack out of the South African flag. And I wrote a letter to the Times of London saying, that seems fair, even though we'd prefer to have Britain's contribution to history recognised in our flag, but could you then return the diamonds and the gold in the crown jewels? And well, of course, they're not going to consider that, are they? But we've got an interesting relationship with the royal family, and South Africa certainly contributed a lot of what is in the crown jewels and in the Tower of London. And yes, that is the same crown, worn over 70 years. Notice when you look at the royal family's crest, you've got the Lion of Judah, and you've got the Harp of David, two important symbols of the House of David. Back in the time of Queen Victoria, she commissioned a family line to see how far back they could find the family tree going. And Queen Victoria was convinced, and it was published, and even a recent book called Coronation, that the full line tracing the royal family back through to not just William the Conqueror, but to King Alfred the Great, and through the princesses that fled to Ireland and to Scotland after the fall of Jerusalem, back to the daughters of the last king of Judah and to King David himself. Interesting, you can certainly see the Harp of David and Lion of Judah as part of the royal crest, and it's been their belief that they are part of the House of David since that time. And that's why they always have the coronations over the stone of Scone, or Jacob's pillow, which is brought backwards and forwards from Scotland and put under the throne for the coronation. As you can see, the Queen aimed to please, and she really loved her horses. You can see she's a very good equestrian. You know, it's one thing to ride, it's another thing when you can ride side saddle. And she, being a lady, could do that. With some of the Commonwealth leaders, again see the royal crest behind, with the Harp of David and the Lion of Judah. And of course they became not just parents, but grandparents and great-grandparents. And on the Queen's 80th birthday, it was intriguing that now her 80th birthday, there was a whole lot of different things calculated. And so shortly after that, she celebrated her Diamond Jubilee in 2012. At that stage, the Queen had conferred over 387,000 honours and awards, personally held 540 investitures, received over 3 million items of correspondence, 3 million letters. She had hosted more than 1.1 million people in her garden parties, not all at once, of course. She worked with, at that stage, 11 British Prime Ministers. Now it's 14 British Prime Ministers she worked with, and 14 American presidents, by the way. She is patron of more than 620 charities and organizations. She undertook 256 overseas official visits to 129 countries. I don't know anyone else who's been to 129 countries. My father-in-law, Bill Bathman, went to 111 countries, which is close, but not quite. Attended 34 Royal Variety performances, opened 15 bridges in the United Kingdom, gave 91 state banquets, launched 23 ships, took the salute at 63 Trooping of the Colour ceremonies, sat for 139 official portraits, at least, opened Parliament every year, owned more than 30 corgis. Must have been a very lucky corgi to end up as Queen Elizabeth's pet. And here you see even 007 joining the Queen for opening of the Olympic Games. In fact, that was an intriguing thing because these folks who were trying to prepare for the Olympic Games thought it would be such fun if they could somehow incorporate the Queen into the opening. And so they asked if she would mind if they had someone like Helen Mirren play her as the Queen meeting 007 and then parachuting in there. She said, "Oh no, I want to do it myself." And she's the one who actually came up with the idea, and you know, they didn't want her to say anything. She said, "No, I've got to say something," and I'd be sitting at the desk. And so she basically wrote her own script, they said. Nobody directed it. It was her idea. And they were just amazed. And 007 was, in fact, the way he described it when Daniel Craig was being interviewed about this, he said he came into the room and she just kept ignoring him, and she kept working at a correspondence desk, and he was getting a bit uncomfortable. That's why he said he wasn't acting, he's literally looking around wondering, cleared his throat. And apparently the Queen was having a fit of the giggles, so she couldn't turn around just yet because she was giggling so much about this. And when she could finally compose herself, she turned around and said, "Good evening, Mr. Bond," and which again wasn't scripted, and went on with the corgis, and they weren't scripted either. Well, there's so much pageantry involved in the royal family's life, but remember, this is all for a purpose. And she, as you can see from the outpouring of love and grief and remorse over her loss, she represented Britain, she represented Christianity, she represented the country, nationalism, all the things that the New World Order hates these days. Well, here I think you can see what an animal lover she was and what lucky dogs they were to end up as part of the royal family. Back in 2012, for her Diamond Jubilee, the Bible Society and Scripture Union collaborated to produce a book called The Servant Queen and the King She Serves. And I've got this book, and it consists of excerpts from the Queen's speeches throughout her reign. At that stage, 60 years. And it was amazing to see from the very first, she's consistently quoted Scripture, spoken from Pilgrim's Progress, given the gospel presentation of Christmas messages and Easter messages and others, and a very good title, The Servant Queen and the King She Serves. You know, to think this is somebody who was serving at 96, a longer week and a longer day than most people do, that's for sure. And she was working up to her last week. She never retired. That's quite remarkable. Here's one of the quotes. Jesus, whose teachings have been handed down from generation to generation, have been the bedrock of my faith. His birth marked a new beginning. As the carol says, the hopes and fears of all the years are met indeed tonight. That was her last Christmas message. History teaches us we need saving from ourselves, from our recklessness or our greed. God sent in the world neither a philosophy or a general, but a savior with the power to forgive. One of the co-authors who helped edit the book, The Servant Queen and the King She Serves, said, it was a penny drop moment for me. That's a very British common term, like the penny dropped. Suddenly they came to understand. I always knew the Queen was a Christian, but it's the way she lives it. Here's a global leader under constant media scrutiny, work in a multicultural, multi-faith, politically correct society, who's brilliant at her job and utterly clear and unashamed about her beliefs. What an example of whole life discipleship. And it's true, she's given a consistent Christmas message. Now, obviously, I would have liked to have made a bolder stand and to have said no and to have sent to the tower and beheaded a few of her foreign office people and prime ministers. But, you know, without trying to be too critical, she still represents Christian nationalism in a globalist, multicultural society, and how refreshing to see that the people love her more than Gorbachev and co, which the New World Order would like you to be aspiring to. Very bold colors. She really went for her own fashion statements. And over the years, a consistent example of someone who was devoted to her calling and her people. Do you know why the royal standard can never be at half-mast? It's never been at half-mast and it can never be at half-mast. When the Queen died, they did not put the royal standard at half-mast, they only put the Union Jack at half-mast. Why is that? It does not represent one monarch. It represents the reigning monarch. Therefore, just like we can never have the Christian flag at half-mast because death for the Christian is not fatal, death for the Christian is not final. We can have a national flag at half-mast. We could never put our Christian flag at half-mast. So when my wife died, we brought the Austrian flag here and put that at half-mast because I couldn't put the Christian flag at half-mast because there is no death for the Christian, is there? The monarch, when they die, the next in line becomes monarch. So you can't put the monarchy's flag at half-mast because the Queen is dead, long live the king. The instant the Queen dies, her son becomes king. And so this is why they could not put the royal standard at half-mast. They had to take that down, put up the Union Jack, and that went to half-mast. Charles Spurgeon said, we have suffered bereavement after bereavement, but we are going to the land of the immortal, where graves do not exist. It's true, we live in the land of the dying, where we speak of this is the land of the living, this is actually the land of the dying. We speak of heaven as the land of the dying, but actually that's the land of the living. That's where nobody dies. The day after the Queen's death, there's this beautiful rainbow over Buckingham Palace. And now, for the first time in my lifetime, there's a king in England. They planned out Operation London Bridge for the last 70 years. From the day the Queen became Queen, they started the plans for what's going to happen when she dies, because they didn't know when she could die. Her coffin was made 68 years ago. I mean, honestly, that's how organized they are. It takes a long time. It's real crafted work. And by the way, it's lined with lead. So you can really feel for those poor soldiers who have to lift it. This is not just, it's oak coffin. This is not eco pine. This is oak. Oak lined with lead. This is very serious weightlifting for those 8 soldiers, if you want to just, when you speak about being carried by 6, well, they need 8 to carry this coffin because the royal coffin is oak, lead lined. But Operation London Bridge has been planned and revised over the last 70 years. And in the event of it dying in Scotland, that activated Project Unicorn, which was to bring the body back to London from Scotland. So all this was planned out long before. I think you can see what's going on in Britain right now is everything, the entire state, every unit in the army, in the police, even the media, all harnessed for this purpose, to express the identity of the British family as a monarchy, as a constitutional monarchy. This is one of the most lovely cartoons I've seen commemorating Lord's death. There must be a lot of corgis up there, very happy to see you. In Sydney, and interesting enough, this opera house was opened by Queen Elizabeth. And so they put up a magnificent projection of the Queen on the Opera House. I've been here in Shankill Road in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and they've always had on this wall something honouring the Queen. When I was there, they were honouring her Golden Jubilee. But now this is what's there this week, and people, of course, starting to lay flowers there. This is the Protestant section of Belfast, as you can tell. Even in Berlin, they lit up the Brandenburg Gate in the Union Jack colours in honour of the Queen. My father was a bombardier in the Royal Artillery, and 25-pounder is our traditional weapon. The artillery went out the next day and fired in Hyde Park a 41-gun salute. 41-gun salute in tribute of a monarch who has died. But then they fired on the next day. They sent out the artillery to the Tower of London, and they fired a 96-gun salute. Why would they fire a 96-gun salute?
She's 96 years old.
96 years old. 1 round for every year she lived. And so this is the 96-gun salute at Tower Bridge. At Piccadilly Circus, I've been here too, quite a few open-air preaching and gospel literature distributions around here. Magnificent how so many shops have taken down their normal displays, blacked out the windows, and just had a picture of the Queen or the uniform of the Queen that she wore during the war, things like this. And the advertisers also changing the adverts at Piccadilly Circus, which advertise all sorts of things, to mourn. And so extraordinary. All the shops shut initially, and then they started to open, but with very muted and honouring displays in the windows. The Horse Guards and the Grenadier Guards, the Coldstream Guards, they had to do their practices in the dark. This is why you might have wondered, why is this guard on duty fainting? Well, they've been training through the night. They've been practicing when everyone else is sleeping because the streets are open. Soldiers need to know how to operate with less sleep, and you can imagine there wouldn't be much sleep for these folks these days. So these were the practice runs before, and they've been training for this sort of thing for years. Now these are the Horse Guards, but it was determined that the Horse Guard should walk, not ride. And notice the swords are reversed. And the Hussars, Coldstream Guards, this is what we saw video of just now as they were preparing up the Mall. Now, Buckingham Palace would be behind. That's this monument to Queen Victoria. This is called the Mall, Hyde Park on both sides. And then you get to the Admiralty Gate, and just beyond it, can you see there's Nelson's Column? So that's Trafalgar Square. South Africa House is just to the right of that. And from here, they will move down towards Whitehall. Parliament is around there. You can see St. Paul's. That's the highest point in London. That's the parish church of the people of London. Now, the Queen, her church is Westminster Abbey. But St. Paul's is where, for example, Margaret Thatcher was buried. Had her funeral, I should say. And that's where you will get the graves of General Charles Gordon. That's also where Princess Diana was married to Charles. Because that's the People's Chapel, St. Paul's. And that's the highest point in London. Walking up there, those poor people who were carrying Margaret Thatcher's coffin, they were going up a very steep incline. I've walked up there without carrying a coffin, and you do feel it. But the Queen would have gone right to Westminster Abbey because that's the royal one. And the Mall, this is from yesterday. Now remember, at Reformation Society last week, we announced London Bridge is down, which is the code word that the Queen has died. And that came out while we were having a meeting last Thursday. So exactly a week ago, the Queen died. And just yesterday, her body was moved to Westminster Abbey. And these are the pictures of that procession. You may wonder who are all these people, because not all of them are family. It was the Queen's wish that her servants, attendants, many of whom were from the military, should take part in the procession. And so you'll see with the royal family are the family servants, the household servants and special guards, the people who are connected to them in one way or the other. And there is the crown, which includes one of the Cullinan diamonds, and in Westminster Hall. Now, Westminster Hall is the hall in which Westminster Catechism, the Westminster Confession, was produced in the 1660s during the English Civil War. It's in this hall that the first Charles I, was put on trial for treason and condemned to death by Parliament. A lot of historic things have happened in Westminster Hall. It is the biggest, greatest hall probably available in England. So this is where they are holding it. You'll see that you've got the beef eater, so-called, or the yeoman of the guard at the Tower of London, and all of them have to be sergeant majors. They're all retired sergeant majors from the regular British Army. You can't get into being one of these yeomen without having been a sergeant major, which is a rare honor. And then you see the men closest in are the horse guards. And they had the beef eaters carrying the coffins in. Now, by way of contrast, the mass media and the globalists poured out the adulation and extravagant praise upon the last communist dictator of the Soviet Union. You can see a lot of the creeps in CNN and CBS and so on. They really, really are aghast at all this popular sympathy for the Queen. They don't like that. They don't understand this. And they complain about, what a waste of money and so on. Oh, they don't mind billions for weapons for Ukraine. They don't mind trillions wasted on the COVID cult lockdown. They don't mind all sorts of, but when it comes to tradition, when it comes to your nation, the royal family, monarchy, your faith, Christianity, then they're suddenly concerned about cost. Well, that's intriguing. But remember, the entire British armed forces exists for this purpose. And this is what they're trained for. It's not like they're hiring actors here. I mean, these are the military in Britain. This is their job. This is what they're here for. And it's also putting the edge on their training, and it's displaying to the world what their military are capable of in terms of discipline, in terms of their abilities in organization, everything. And so that the entire British armed forces and municipalities have been mobilized in order to honor the Queen. This is an important statement, but the globalists don't understand it because they hate Christianity, they hate nations, they hate the monarchy, they hate tradition. They want to get rid of all that. I mean, we want to have a great reset. So you shouldn't be caring about the Queen. You should be worshipping and adulating and praising Gorbachev. I mean, Mikhail Gorbachev initiated the Great Reset. And so the globalists wanted you to get all excited about Gorby. So take, for example, such an illustrious leader as Joe Biden. He said, Mikhail Gorbachev is a man of remarkable vision and courage, a rare leader, dictator actually. According to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Mikhail Gorbachev was a one-of-a-kind statesman who changed the course of history. He did more than any other individual to bring about the peaceful end of the Cold War. How? He was the one who was escalating it. He was trying to beat America at the space race and everything else. He just got beaten and bankrupted by Ronald Reagan's better strategy. But anyway, the world has lost a towering global leader, committed multilateralist, tireless advocate for peace, said Guterres. Former German Chancellor Angela Merkel said Gorbachev wrote world history. He exemplified how a single statesman can change the world. If you want to know why the world's worse, people like that. Russian President Vladimir Putin gave a very muted statement. He stressed Gorbachev's humanitarian side. I will especially note the great humanitarian, charitable and educational activities that Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev has been conducting in recent years. Not a word about what he did when he was dictator of the Soviet Union. Former US Secretary of State James Baker, who was Secretary of State under George Bush Sr., averred Gorbachev was a giant, an honest broker, whom he could trust. History will remember Mikhail Gorbachev as a giant who steered his great nation towards democracy. The free world missed him greatly. Well, interesting, Russia doesn't seem to miss him. I mean, as you saw from the video clips you showed, as I said, hundreds of people came to pay the respects to Mikhail Gorbachev. Well, millions are paying the respect to Queen Elizabeth, if not tens of millions. But hundreds in Russia have shown interest in Gorbachev. But Vladimir Putin was too busy to attend his funeral. And so it's gone with the garish gushings for Gorby from the globalist chorus since it was announced that the sainted communist leader had passed his eternal reward on the 30th of August. And in fact, Mikhail Gorbachev said, "I am a Marxist-Leninist. I am a communist. And as a Marxist-Leninist communist, I go to another world." Fair enough. I don't think he'll find as much enthusiasm for himself in this other world that he's found here. But the Gorbachev cult far exceeded the infamous cults of personality campaigns of the mass-murdering dictators Joseph Stalin and Mao Zedong, because those were directed by their own respective communist parties, carried out by the state-owned, state-controlled media propaganda organs. But the Gorby cult is different in that it's global. It's not national. It's not just in the Chinese state for Mao or in the Soviet state for Stalin. It's been shamelessly nurtured and promoted by the free world politicians, academics, think tanks, and the media, and Hollywood. But the facts ruin a good narrative. And yes, that's what Gorbachev looked like in the last years of his life. Not everyone's joined this adulation. Lithuanian Foreign Minister Gabrielis Landsbergis said Lithuanians will not glorify Gorbachev. We will never forget the simple fact that his army murdered civilians to prolong his regime's occupation of our country, Lithuania. His soldiers fired on our unarmed protesters and crushed them under his tanks. That is how we will remember him. Comments like those of Landsbergis and the victims of Soviet atrocities and Soviet occupation are dismissed by the Gorby adoration crowd. Their choir dismissed that because they see it as just the bitter rantings of zealots still stuck in a Cold War mentality. Like most communist leaders, there's a lot about Gorbachev's life that remains shrouded in mystery and the shadows. But there's much that is known. We know, for example, that Gorbachev presided over much of the genocidal rape of Afghanistan. He armed international terrorist groups and terrorist regimes throughout the Middle East and Cuba and North Korea and elsewhere. He armed, supplied, and subsidized the Cuban-backed genocides in Ethiopia and Angola, which butchered Christians by the hundreds of thousands, and I've documented a lot of that, even in my book, on what they did in Angola, murdering Christians, destroying churches. Gorbachev supported the brutal communist Sandinista regime in Nicaragua, who again persecuted the church relentlessly. Gorbachev continued and expanded the massive Soviet drug offensive against the West. If you don't know about this, you just need to read a book like Red Cocaine, The Drugging of America in the West. The KGB organized massive drug cartels, and that even the drug cartels in Colombia and Venezuela operating into America were controlled by the Cuban version of the KGB, and was one of their primary goals to undermine the undermine the moral fiber of the young men in the West, in Europe and America, Australia, and so on, introducing drugs so that the young people from which they must draw their soldiers that would defend them would not have the moral fiber to be able to do so, to make them addicted to drugs. And so the drugging of America, red cocaine, that the Soviet Union put hundreds of millions of dollars into, this campaign to smuggle drugs in and to get the young people in their countries addicted to drugs. That Gorbachev increased the power and the prestige of the KGB. He used troops, tanks, and even poison gas to crush protesters who were seeking freedom in Kazakhstan, Georgia, Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. Top communist leaders telegraphed decades in advance that they would be launching an incredible peace offensive to put the West to sleep. Already in the 60s, the plans were prepared. And Soviet defectors, reliable anti-communist experts, warned for years against a coming paradigm shift. There are precedents for the Soviet strategic deceptions of this sort. In the 1920s, Vladimir Lenin launched this new economic policy, NEP, pretending to abandon communism and to adopt capitalism to win financial economic aid from the West. There's only so far you can go on revolution. Then you need foreign aid so you can go to the next stage, and so on. Mikhail Gorbachev was a master of deceit. He carried out a plan, together with his fellow strategists in Moscow and fellow one world globalists in the West, to destroy freedom and to destroy nationalism. In his draft 1921 thesis on the role and functions of trade unions under the economic policy, Soviet dictator Vladimir Lenin declared, "The new economic policy introduced a number of important changes, which are due to the fact that in the entire policy of transition from capitalism to socialism, the Communist Party and the Soviet government are now adopting special methods to implement this transition. And in many respects are operating differently from the way they operated before. They're capturing a number of positions by new flanking movements." Flanking, you go around your enemy. So to speak, they're drawing back in order to make better preparations for a new offensive against capitalism. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So like the hammer goes down, now the hammer goes back. The hammer goes down. Now, withdrawing the hammer is part of the process of driving in the nail. And so, to bring down the hammer, crushing and repression. Bring back the hammer, détente, peaceful coexistence, perestroika, glasnost. So you have these periods of pulling back the hammer, but that's only preparation for the next drawing and driving in the nail. In particular, a free market and capitalism, both subject to state control, are now being permitted. So state-controlled capitalism. Lenin's free market was nothing of the sort. It wasn't free at all. It was, as Lenin himself admitted, a state-controlled sham that served as a deceptive flanking maneuver. However, much of the media dutifully portrayed it as an exciting opportunity for the West. Lenin abandons state ownership as Soviet policy. That's what the headlines trumpeted in August the 13th, 1921, New York Times. Lenin abandons state ownership as Soviet policy. Can you believe it? Well, a lot of people did believe it, actually. Lenin has thrown communism overboard, the Times proclaimed. Times continued to publish such bills for every successive Soviet deception without exception. They believed it always. The above quote from Lenin was quoted in its entirety in the May 1991 edition of Political Affairs, which was the official journal of the Communist Party USA, by CPUSA leader Karl Blois. Comrade Blois was explaining to the Communist Party USA faithful that they should not be confused by the seemingly chaotic disintegration of the Soviet Union. Gorbachev and Soviet leadership had adopted Lenin's NEP strategy. By the way, isn't it interesting to see who the main idols of the Communist Party USA are? Lenin, Stalin, Lincoln. Blois noted that changes do not themselves constitute a threat to the socialist, that is, communist principles. Indeed, they're being undertaken with a view to strengthening the system. Then, using Lenin's phrase, Blois emphasized that all of this new Soviet thrust would require special methods. Blois had been to Moscow many times to confer with the top Soviet leadership. He knew Gorbachev, he knew he was a thorough Leninist, and Gorbachev, in his 1987 book, Perestroika, New Thinking for Our Country and the World, was very explicit that his Leninist principles were guiding what he was doing. One of the subtitles in the book's first chapter is Turning to Lenin, an ideological source for perestroika. Now, perestroika literally means restructuring, but the West decided to reinterpret that to mean openness. Restructuring is what it really means, I'm told by Russians. Gorbachev says of the Bolshevik butcher Lenin, His very image is an undying example of the lofty moral strength, all-round spiritual culture, selfless devotion to the cause of the people and to socialism. So according to Gorbachev, perestroika is the most important, most radical program for economic reform a country has had since Lenin introduced the new economic policy in 1921. He further stated, and here he's standing next to Honecker, the butcher of East Germany, who was machine gunning his own people in the back when they tried to escape across the Berlin Wall. He said, this whole program is fully based on a principle of more socialism and more democracy. We want more socialism, therefore we want more democracy. Democracy is the pathway to socialism. Antonij Golitsyn was perhaps the most important KGB defector ever to escape the West, and he has been exposing Soviet strategic deception for more than 4 decades, with an unparalleled track record for accuracy. He produced the book New Lies for Old, and later the Perestroika Deception. Golitsyn, who worked in the ultra-secret inner sanctum of the KGB, noted, to be credible and effective, a deception should be accorded as far as possible with the hopes and expectations of those it is intended to deceive. Gorbachev's Leninist perestroika deception fitted the bill perfectly. Everyone in the West wanted to believe we'd won the Cold War, the threat of nuclear war between the superpowers was a thing of the past, and Gorbachev played a key role in the globalist communist Great Reset. He, in fact, initiated the Great Reset. We know Mikhail Gorbachev had the Order of Lenin. Well, he should also be given the Order of the Watermelon. Because Gorbachev's New Lies for Old, Earth Summit at Rio, Earth Charter, Agenda 21, which he wrote the Earth Charter to be a new 10 commands and a new Sermon on the Mount to guide humanity, quote unquote. A new 10 commands. Something wrong with the old 10 commands? A new Sermon on the Mount, like they've expired? To guide humanity. I mean, this is religious talk here. And as you can see, it's even structured in a religious style, as though it's a new 10 commands. And it's like a watermelon. These Greens, these environmentalists that Gorbachev's leading, are actually green on the outside, but they're red on the inside. Communist red on the inside. Now, of course, I'm a conservationist. I believe in fighting pollution, protecting the environment. I mean, who wouldn't? Who in their right mind wouldn't support caring for the planet and caring for animals? And conservation and environmentalism should be good. And to a large extent, I am one of those. But the communists have hijacked the environmentalist movement, an outwardly good cause, and have taken it over for a globalist, Great Reset, socialist, communist agenda. The Earth Charter is an international declaration of fundamental values and principles to help create a global partnership, I'm quoting from them here, to provide a new framework for thinking with the purpose of developing a global consensus of values and principles. I mean, can you see what they're saying here? Global consensus. You're not allowed to think otherwise. You don't think, according to global consensus, thought crime. The idea of the Earth Charter originated in 1987 by Maurice Strong and Mikhail Gorbachev, who were both members of the Club of Rome. If you thought the Club of Rome was just a bunch of capitalists, think again. While dictator of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev was one of them. One of the members of the Earth Charters Commission Steering Committee was Stephen Clark Rockefeller, who, amongst other things, is Professor Emeritus of Religion at Middleburg College and advisory trustee of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. Quoting from them, to build democratic societies, adopt patterns of production, consumption, and reproduction, affirm gender equality and equity as prerequisites without discrimination. Production, what you can produce, consumption, what you're allowed to, reproduction, whether you're allowed to have children or not. Democracy, non-violence, and peace. Remember, peace is the absence of resistance to communism. Strengthen democratic institutions at all levels. Integrate into formal education, think indoctrination. Promote a culture of tolerance, non-violence, and peace. Tolerance means you've got to tolerate any evil. Of course, they're intolerant of your intolerance. The Earth Charter is defined as a declaration of fundamental principles for building a just, sustainable, peaceful global society in the 21st century. Formally adopted by UNESCO, 250 universities around the World Conservation Union, Indian National Capital Territory of Delhi, Conference of American Mayors, dozens of youth organizations, all kinds of religious groups, Buddhists worldwide, the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations, they've supported it. The Baha'i religion has issued comments in support of this. Baha'is, of course, say all paths lead to God. The World Pantheistic Movement, which supports a naturalistic view of religion, they endorse it. This is all one world interfaith religion, one world economic system, one world government. This should ring some bells. There's a chapter in the Bible, like Revelation 13, that speaks of these things. The Episcopal Diocese of New York, Episcopal Christian organization, all endorsed the Earth Charter already in 2009. In May 1992, more than 650 representatives of indigenous peoples adopted their own 109-point Indigenous People Earth Charter, and again 96 even more participated in this. The Russian Association of Indigenous Peoples of the North, representing 31 indigenous people living in Siberia and Eastern Russia, also endorsed the Earth Charter formally. This is meant to be, remember, a new 10 Commands, a new Sermon on the Mount to guide humanity. At the 2002 World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg, here in South Africa, a copy of their document, the Earth Charter, which Gorbachev wrote, was symbolically placed in an ark of hope. I mean, this is religious symbolism all over the place. The full text of Agenda 21 was made public at the UN Conference on Environment and Development, the Earth Summit, held in Rio de Janeiro, 13th of June, 1992, where 178 governments adopted this program, which was written by Gorbachev. 1997, the UN Assembly held a special session to appraise the status of Agenda 21. They called this Rio Plus 5. Why plus 5? Well, you know, every communist government's got a 5-year plan. The 5-year plan. And then there was Rio Plus 10, World Summit Sustainable Development 2002, which was held in Johannesburg, South Africa, looking again at how to fully implement Agenda 21. And then they had Rio Plus 20. That's 5-year plan times 4. 2012, the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development, attending members reaffirmed the commitment to Agenda 21, which means Agenda for the 21st Century. In the outcome document, The Future We Want, leaders from 180 countries participated. This should be concerning. Agenda 21 is a plot disguised as an environmentalist movement to end individual freedom and establish a one-world government. Agenda 21 is the linchpin in a plot to subjugate humanity under an eco-totalitarian regime. It pretends to be green, but it's run by communists who are the worst polluters and the worst human rights abusers and the most cruel when it comes to wildlife as well, by the way. Basically, the goal is the end of national sovereignty, the end of private property, restructuring of families, abolition of families. That's why they push the LGBTQ, that's why they've got a war on fathers, that's why they've got a war on masculinity, why they've got a war on femininity, that's why they're wanting classless, genderless people who are part of a classless world society who depend on the world state for everything. And that's why farmers who are self-sufficient are the enemies. That's why nation states are the enemies. That's why Christianity is the enemies. They want a one world government with a one world economic system and a one world interfaith religion. Consider the revolutionary goals adopted by the Illuminati on the 1st of May 1776 in Frankfurt. Adam Weishaupt, Meyer Rothschild, Jacob Frank. Jacob Frank being the Sabbatean following Sabbatai Zevi, Meyer Rothschild, the bank who initiated the whole Rothschild dynasty, Adam Weishaupt, who was a renegade Jesuit priest who launched this whole thing of the Illuminati. Number 1, abolition of all monarchies and all governments. Number 2, abolition of private property and inheritances. Number 3, abolition of nationalism. Number 4, abolition of the family and the institution of marriage. Number 5, abolition of all religion. Number 6, establishment of compulsory communal education for all children. Now, if you've read the Communist Manifesto, you will recognize all of these points in the Communist Manifesto. And you'll recognize all these points in Agenda 21 and in the Earth Charter. It's all the same agenda. On the 6th of June 1992, the Rio Earth Summit delegates asked Gorbachev to establish the Green Cross International. The organization's stated mission is to respond to the combined challenges of security, poverty, and environmental degradation to ensure a sustainable and secure future. Gobbledygook, basically, Gorbachev went from being dictator of the Soviet Union to being an influencer of the whole world. to promote legal, ethical, behavioral norms that ensure basic changes in the values, actions, and attitudes of government, the private sector, and civil society necessary to develop a sustainable global community. What do they mean, sustainable global community? Communism, one world government. Revelation 13, one world government, one world economic system, one world interfaith religious system. To promote legal, ethical, behavioral norms that change the basic way you think of values, actions, and attitude, not just of government, but the private sector and civil society. They talk, this is, another word for this is revolution. To contribute to the prevention and resolution of conflicts. If you wonder what this picture is, this is the launch of Green Cross in The Hague in Holland. There's Gorbachev, there's his wife Russia, in the middle of what obviously was a beautiful church, but which is now being used for promotion of world government in The Hague in Netherlands. Today, member organizations of the Green Cross are in 30 countries. Gorbachev played a starring role in this extended drama to create a communist-style global regime, the most recent expression of which is the Great Reset, announced by the billionaires club known as the World Economic Forum in 2020. Their Great Reset intends to reset the planet, or revolutionize the planet, and all humanity economically, politically, socially, biologically, morally, spiritually, along communist lines, with central planning, control, regimentation of every aspect of human life. I mentioned Maurice Strong. A few words about him. Maurice Frederick Strong was a Canadian oil and mineral businessman, diplomat who served as Under Secretary General of the United Nations. Strong is Gorbachev's #1 partner. These were the two partners in crime. He stated that growing up during the Depression radicalized him, and he considered himself to be a socialist in ideology and a capitalist in methodology. There's a lot of communist capitalists out there, by the way. They bankrolled the Bolshevik Revolution, for example. In the early 1970s, Strong was Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Human Environment. He became the first Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program. Strong was an active honorary professor at Peking University in Red China, honorary chairman of its Environmental Foundation, chairman of the advisory board for the Institute for Research and Security Sustainability for Northeast Asia. In 2005, during investigations into the UN's Oil for Food program scandal, it was found that while working for Kofi Annan, Secretary General, Strong endorsed a check for nearly $1 million made out to Mr. Strong, issued by a Jordanian bank. This check was hand-delivered to Mr. Strong by a South Korean businessman who was convicted in court of conspiring to bribe UN officials to rig the oil for food in favor of Saddam Hussein. And Kofi Annan and his son and others made millions and multiplied millions, and Strong was part of the corruption of that too, although he's apparently too important to go to prison for it. From 2003 to 2005, Maurice Strong served as personal envoy to United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan to lead the support for international response to humanitarian development aid to the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And so we come back to Gorbachev. This is Gorbachev's funeral. And as they said, hundreds of people paying respects to Gorbachev. Not exactly comparable to the outpouring of devotion to Queen Elizabeth. 2 Peter 2:19, while they promised them freedom, they themselves are slaves of depravity. Gorbachev represents globalism. Queen Elizabeth represents Christian nationalism and tradition. Despite every globalist attempt to destroy it, nationalism, Christianity, and tradition are stronger than had previously been appreciated. And the globalist New World disorder is facing some serious resistance all over the world, and unexpected reverses like Brexit. And I dare say right now, they must be aghast at even Australia, even Ireland, even Sinn Féin expressing their condolences for the Queen, even Vladimir Putin sending very seriously sincere condolences to the British family, royal family, over the loss of Queen Elizabeth and praising her. Christianity, nationalism, and tradition are much, much stronger than most people would have ever expected. Here's a famous Norman Rockwell painting. People in New York walking by with their heads looking down, and on the cathedral it says, "Lift up thine eyes." And I think a lot of people are so stuck in what's going on here, we need to stop every now and then and lift up our eyes and see the big picture and see what God is doing. We hear the bad news of what Satan is doing. We need to see the good news of what God is doing. And quite plainly, what is going on right now is remarkable. I don't think most people could have anticipated. In our lifetime, we've never seen anything like this. What is going on in Great Britain right now and all over the world, you can see there's a deep-seated hunger for tradition and family and eternity and God, which all the attempts at the Great Reset and all the globalist attempts to secularize us and to make us into some globalist, classless, genderless morph is basically failing. They are getting desperate. They're getting more and more threatening. But the fact is, you can see there's resistance against their gender confusion. There's resistance to the LGBT agenda, resistance to their critical race theory indoctrination. There's resistance to a whole lot of things. And I think the mediocre, lukewarm, apathetic response to Gorbachev's death and adulation in the press, and the unexpected ignoring of what the rest of the media says, and showing real devotion to tradition, family, monarchy, nation, Christianity, I think this has got to be a bit of a nightmare for our globalist enemies.